Tech Talk channel warmly welcomes you. This is another episode of 2 Weekly, which means it comes out every 2 weeks. Today's episode will be intense. I recommend watching it till the end. Then all the pieces will come together into a single picture, and that picture will be terrifying. After watching this episode, you might feel like hugging your loved ones and telling them what you've been meaning to say, but never got around to. So I suggest doing that right after you finish watching. As for the rest, all topics with timestamps are in the description. Don't switch off until the very end, and let's get started. We'll begin with a harmless topic, but it still holds some relevance in the context of current events. When Joe Biden stepped down from the presidential race and Kamala Harris took the lead, many recalled that this was predicted in The Simpsons, just like everything else in modern American history. In the episode Bart to the Future from season 11, Lisa Simpson becomes the first female president. There were a few parallels with Kamala Harris, but back then, I noticed one minor detail. But to be fair, it should be noted that Lisa doesn't come instead of Trump, but after Trump, who completely drained the American treasury, leaving Lisa to beg for money. Well, let's see if we live another 4 years. Was it really in The Simpsons? Or rather, in 2 Weekly episode number 6. I'll insert another clip from that episode. The episode ends with Bart resolving the situation with the creditors. Among the creditors, at least, are Germany, China, and most likely Italy. And when Lisa asks, "How can I thank you?" Bart replies,
"What can I do to thank you?" "Legalize it." "Legalize what?" Oh, consider it done." Tasty. That calls for some Tunskis.
Information about a serious vulnerability affecting Nvidia graphics card owners surfaced last week. Well, to be precise, it spread across Russian language resources on November 4th, while in the English-speaking media I found news of 8 critical vulnerabilities dated October 28th. I couldn't find an official statement from Nvidia. The issue affects all Nvidia cards without exception, and the developers rated the severity at 7 to 8 out of 10, which is considered extremely high. These vulnerabilities give attackers various capabilities, including injecting malicious code and taking control of the system. I couldn't find specifics on how the exploits are used, but it doesn't really matter since Nvidia has already released driver updates and strongly recommends users update. Following the developer's advice, I also recommend doing the same, especially since it's easy. I'll quickly show you how, just in case anyone doesn't know. It's simple. So, if you have Nvidia GeForce Experience installed, it's straightforward. Go to the Drivers tab, and it will suggest downloading and installing version 5666.03, the one recommended by the developers. If you don't have it installed, go to the GeForce website to find the required driver. If you don't know which graphics card you have, open Device Manager, go to Display Adapters, and there you'll find the name of your card. In my case, it's the GeForce 1070 for laptops. Technically, you can reinstall the driver from here, but I never do it that way and don't trust what it might install. And that's it. Find your graphics card, click Download. If you game more, choose Game Ready. If you work more, choose NVIDIA Studio, but I don't think there's much of a difference. After downloading, run the installer. Enjoy. Don't delay. It really only takes 10 minutes. And even if the threat turns out to be a false alarm, since once again, I couldn't find information from NVIDIA, it won't hurt. A rather sad piece of news came last week from Roskomnadzor. "We will stop at nothing to protect the sovereign Runet," this news says, but it reads more like, "Your internet is still working? Then we're coming for you." Roskomnadzor blocked or plans to block the CDN service Cloudflare in response to Cloudflare's decision to enable ECH, encrypted client hello, by default for all its clients. ECH encrypts the server request containing the domain name. It's the first signal used by DPI systems to identify an attempt to access a banned website and block it. But if the packet with the domain name is encrypted, the system can't see where the user is going and can't block the connection, although in reality they can do anything. The second indicator to detect a banned site is the IP address. But with Cloudflare, the IP address gets lost among countless other IPs of this CDN. That's what makes it a CDN. If they try to block a specific IP address, it's unclear what they're actually blocking. A banned Roskomsvoboda site or an unsuspecting Sberbank. thus enabling ECH by default stumped Roskomnadzor, as it cut off both ways to detect a banned site. So what did Roskomnadzor do? That's right, they blocked Cloudflare, and along with it, a vast number of websites using Cloudflare. Originally, the service was created to counteract DDoS attacks and speed up the internet, the main functions of a CDN and DNS services. It's a good, reliable, and convenient service. I used it myself and recommended it to everyone. In my circle, about 70% of websites rely on Cloudflare. Roskomnadzor justified its decision partly by stating that Cloudflare was one of the big tech companies gathered by the U.S. State Department in September to discuss comprehensive and coordinated opposition to countries actively defending their information sovereignty. There's something off here. This phrase seems to defy logic. Perhaps it's the word opposition. Try pausing the video and think about what they might have meant. All right. Be that as it may, we reached out to Phil Kulin, the author of the Telegram channel Escher and an expert on analyzing blockages, to ask how many websites might be affected, what site owners stand to lose, and what his thoughts are. Is this the end, or is there still more to come?
Let's
put it simply. Roskomnadzor needs to block something. Encrypting this header is a technology specifically designed so that you can't track where a user is going, and accordingly, you can't block them either. That's one of the aims of this situation. And Roskomnadzor has a method. Back in 2018, they might have done it this way, but they didn't have such a method then. Now they do, and they blocked it. That's it. It's a straightforward situation. Given the current level of censorship and considering the ongoing trend towards the localization of services, there's nothing surprising here. Roskomnadzor won't even think about what happens to services that aren't based inside the country, that's obvious. So, from this perspective, nothing unexpected or particularly frightening happened. Well, some people won't be able to access certain foreign services. And why should they? They're bad anyway. Our country is ahead of the rest of the world, so why look at foreign services? They're outdated, decaying countries and decaying technologies. What are we even talking about here? Another point is that this is a protection technology. As soon as someone in power starts working against protection technology, they're shooting themselves in the foot. Why? Because protection technologies are made to defend against the bad guys. And when the authorities sometimes act like the bad guys, or for example, when governments around the world try to monopolize things like weapons and violence, sometimes they go too far and end up playing the role of the villains. So, congratulations to them. But there are other bad guys besides the authorities. And it turns out that when you fight against technology, when you fight against privacy protection, well, congratulations to you too. You're also a citizen. That means you might be a government official at work, but outside of work you're an ordinary citizen and you'll suffer from this as well.
На работе вы чиновник, а в обычном деле вы обычный гражданин, и вы от этого тоже пострадаете.
Yes, an interesting comment, thanks to Phil. It never occurred to me that blocking Cloudflare would make millions of websites outside Russia inaccessible for Russians. I only thought about Russian sites, which would have to disable Cloudflare and move elsewhere, and they will do that. But why would services like Notion or Runway do it? So that users from Russia could access them? Yes. It turns out things are much worse than I anticipated. By the way, there's a link to Phil's channel in the description. Subscribe. Let's take a break from the topics of blockages and hacks with a couple of news items about neural networks. The second one is going to be intense and somewhat apocalyptic, but the first one is harmless and even cute. ChatGPT officially announced the release of its own search engine. This is the harmless part. The cute part is coming up soon. In fact, we discussed this news a few episodes ago when they were just planning the release of the search engine, and back then I thought it was a nightmare. The concern was that if neural networks start generating answers based on website data and then include links to sources, which is how the future search engine's algorithm was described, nobody will visit the actual sites anymore. Website owners would start losing money and shutting down, and neural networks would have nowhere to pull answers from. A vicious circle, back to the Stone Age. But now this news doesn't seem as terrifying to me. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's just because of everything else happening right now. The search engine isn't publicly available yet. It's currently in testing for those who signed up on the waitlist, and the waitlist itself is already closed. The question of how this search engine differs from what's already available remains open. Here's ChatGPT. You ask a question, get an answer, and then see links to relevant resources. There aren't any fancy images like they showed in their video presentation, but personally, I don't need pretty pictures when I'm looking for information. So the announcement of the search engine seems to be just another publicity stunt. In essence, the search engine launched when ChatGPT gained real-time internet access. And now, as promised, here's the cute part. I needed a replacement for Punto Switcher on Linux. It's an automatic keyboard layout switcher for those who don't know. By the way, if you know any good ones, drop them in the comments because ChatGPT gave me a few options, but they were all clunky and didn't work. In the end, the neural network suggested, or you could just write a script. Since none of the suggestions worked, I said, all right, go ahead and write one. And it did. It explained how to bind it to hotkeys, and everything worked. I mean, it literally wrote a program for me in a minute, and in its mind, this is no different from searching for something already made. This is a whole new level. It never even occurred to me that I could just do that. The cute part is that we started developing this script further, under my close supervision, and in the end, everything stopped working. The built-in keyboard switcher disappeared, the hotkeys stopped functioning, and the whole system crashed. In response, ChatGPT wrote, yes, this is definitely not the result we were hoping for. Let's revert everything back to how it was. I've been waiting for this news for a long time. The news that neural networks are enlisting in the military. I was expecting it because neural networks already exist, but Skynet hasn't been created yet. Remember, according to Sarah Connor from the classic Terminator, the machine's uprising happened on August 29, 1997. They started moving the date forward with each new installment of the franchise. The first news I saw came from China, saying that Chinese researchers are working on a neural network called ChatBit, which, as expected, is not based on their own work but on a large language model from Meta, released as open source. The development is linked to the People's Liberation Army of China. The researchers are fine-tuning the model on military dialogues, expecting to create an LLM, large language model, designed for intelligence gathering and analysis. Naturally, the Americans are upset because the model was trained using their resources and by their scientists, but they can't do anything about it since the open source code allows anyone to use it. Meta, trying to soften the blow, claims that the original Llama model with 13 billion parameters used by the Chinese is outdated, and Meta is already training Llama 4 using 100,000 Nvidia H100 accelerators. Each of these accelerators costs around $40,000. Zuckerberg even said, "This will be the biggest thing I've ever seen." Other researchers stated that ChatBit uses a dataset of 100,000 military dialogues, which is just a drop in the ocean. So it's not really a neural network, but more like nonsense. However, something tells me the Chinese aren't that simple, especially considering the recent video generation models they've released. So the dogs bark, but the caravan moves on. And it seems to be heading exactly where we expect. The pace is picking up, as last Thursday brought news that Anthropic has partnered with Palantir and Amazon Web Services to adapt its Claude model for U.S. intelligence and defense needs. We are proud to be at the forefront of implementing responsible AI solutions in U.S. classified environments, enhancing analytical capabilities and operational efficiencies in vital government operations, said Kate Earl Jensen, head of sales at Anthropic. Meta, whose Llama model was taken by the Chinese, also announced that it allows its model to be used by American military and defense contractors for national security purposes. And something tells me that in this case Llama 4 won't be released as open source but will go directly to where the shield and sword are forged. Or maybe it won't be Llama but OpenAI. After all, Altman had a confidential conversation with former President Joe Biden. This happened after Paul Nakasone, former head of the National Security Agency, joined OpenAI's board of directors, and everyone who originally formed OpenAI left the company. Perhaps the juiciest piece for developing Skynet will be taken by Elon Musk. With Trump's victory, Musk is turning into a figure of cosmic scale. At this rate, he won't just head to Mars. With such connections and backing, he'll be flying to Alpha Centauri in a couple of years, digging wormholes in space. But more on that in the next episode when things become a bit clearer about our Elon Musk, the great and terrible. And I want to end this news segment with a video of an AI-powered machine gun from Allen Control Systems shooting down drones. As you might guess, the machine gun was developed at the request of the U.S. Department of Defense. It's equipped with artificial intelligence and computer vision and can operate both with an operator and autonomously. The orders to fire can be given by humans or, as I'll add, by Skynet. News about the exclusion of 11 Russian maintainers from the Linux development pool surfaced in late October. I didn't include it in the previous episode, received criticism in the comments, and decided to make up for it. So, what actually happened? On October 18th, Greg Crower-Hartman, who maintains the stable branch of the Linux kernel and several subsystems, announced the exclusion of 11 Russian developers from the pool of Linux maintainers. Maintainers are developers responsible for specific parts of the Linux kernel, such as drivers, components, or entire architectures. There was no official explanation for this decision, but after a wave of discussion and criticism, Linus Torvalds, in a rather harsh tone, wrote the following. As for sending me a patch for a revert, please try to use what you call brains. I'm Finnish. Did you think I would support Russian aggression? In other words, the decision was political, which understandably caused a mixed reaction. I won't voice the position of those who support it, but critics argue that it contradicts the philosophy of free software. And indeed, it contradicts the philosophy of open-source software as well. If you don't understand the difference, watch my video about Richard Stallman. Link in the description. Maintainers do not receive, well, almost none of them receive a salary from the Linux Foundation, and their work on the project is a voluntary contribution to the development of GNU Linux. However, some of them do receive salaries from other organizations interested in the development of the operating system. For example, Sergei Semin worked on drivers for the Baikal processor. You may have forgotten, but Russia does have its own processor. This means he was paid for this work by Baikal Electronics. But it doesn't matter. For GNU Linux, he was a volunteer contributing to the kernel for free. The response from the Russian side was not long in coming. The Ministry of Digital Development proposed creating its own Linux community from those willing to cooperate with Russia. The Linux license allows this, and it threatens a serious split in the free software community, which has been fairly unified until now. But who am I trying to convince? Politics has always played a huge role here. But honestly, I wished there were islands where its influence was minimal. And I had the illusion that Stallman or Barlow laid the foundations of a world where it's driven away with a broomstick, and that Linux, in this case it's correct to call it Linux, not GNU Linux, belongs to that world. Perhaps it really was an illusion. I think those who watched the episode from October 3 remember the touching story about Stiver. And many of you probably know, even without the episode, that the creator of Flibusta, the largest pirate library, was hospitalized with a giant glioblastoma. I didn't mention in the next episode that Stiver had passed away. It felt too brief, like a small note. Besides, I had already said all the kind words about him in that episode, but now it turns out he was also a talented coder, and many developers benefited from his work in that field as well. So, here's an epitaph. Stiver's main job was related to software for medical equipment, but in 2008, not as part of his work, but as a volunteer, he developed a Java decompiler called Fernflower, which could turn compiled code back into readable source code. This became especially useful when existing tools could no longer handle new language features. Stiver took a new approach to the algorithm, and in 2009 the decompiler was published as a web service, where users decompiled over 500,000 Java classes in the first 4 months. In 2014, JetBrains integrated Fernflower into their development environment IntelliJ IDEA, making it open and accessible to a wide range of developers. Well, I didn't know this, and I think you didn't either. Stiver, by the way, didn't suffer for long. Euthanasia is legal in Germany, though it's called assisted suicide there. Stiver took advantage of this option, and whatever your views on euthanasia, I have my own opinion here, but let's remember a good person. May he rest in peace, or may the earth be soft for him, whichever you prefer. And finally, as is our tradition, 3 short good news stories. Well, if not good, then at least somewhat amusing. And if neither amusing nor good, then at least short. Let's start with Japan. They are planning to launch an automated corridor between Tokyo and Osaka for driverless cargo transportation. I can't recall if there were similar projects before. There should have been, because the idea is extremely simple yet, in my opinion, very effective. Small trucks will continuously transport cargo back and forth, without traffic jams or reckless driving. Testing is planned for 2027-2028, and they aim to launch it commercially by 2030. Next, Elon Musk. Oh, even Trump calls him the Great One. Elon Musk's company SpaceX has scheduled the 6th test flight of Starship for November 19th this year. Let me remind you that the 5th test flight, which took place less than a month ago, was the first successful one in SpaceX's history. The booster rocket, or Super Heavy booster, returned to the launch site and landed successfully. Now it's time to cement this success, especially because millions of Americans are watching Musk closely, and a significant number of them, perhaps a large percentage, are waiting for him to fail. I'll tell you more about this in the next episode when things become clearer. But yesterday Donald Trump announced that he would appoint Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to lead the Department of Government Efficiency. This is a non-governmental organization that could become more powerful than all the government agencies combined, as it will be responsible for firing officials to cut the budget. Musk believes they can save up to $2 trillion. Just imagine how many heads will roll. The department will be called DOGE. Incidentally, the cryptocurrency of the same name has broken all records, even as Bitcoin has seen record growth. Well, things are heating up, so grab your popcorn as well as matches, salt, and hunting rifles like the Saiga, which, by the way, won't help much in the context of news about neural networks serving the Chinese and American governments, and in the context of the next news story. It's neither good nor funny, but at least it's short. The Polish company Clone Robotics has presented a prototype of a humanoid robot. For now, it's just a torso, without legs. Let's just take a look. I think no comments are needed. Is everything clear? Although I'll add one comment after all. Creating the torso was a continuation of the company's work on humanoid robots. It started with developing a robotic arm with artificial bones and muscles. And now you can hug your loved ones and say what you've long wanted to say but never got around to. That's all for now, 2 weekly. We keep track of the news for you and release episodes on Wednesdays. I think it's already become a meme. We've only managed to release on a Wednesday a couple of times. A heartfelt thank you to everyone who watched until the end. If you also leave a like, my gratitude will know no bounds. In the context of this episode, the final phrase is especially relevant. Love each other. Now it's simply a matter of survival. And remember, in the end, everything will be okay. This is Vova Lomov, and this is Tech Talk.